He thought he could say whatever he wanted. He thought his arrogance would let him walk free. But what he didn't expect, a judge who wasn't afraid to put him in his place. When Daniel Parker, a wealthy businessman on trial for fraud, told a black judge to shut up in open court, he thought he was in control. He thought his money and connections would save him. But when she finally delivered her sentence, he learned the hard way who really held the power. Before we dive into this explosive courtroom moment, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories about justice and accountability, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because by the time the judge was finished with him, he wished he had stayed silent. Judge Vanessa Carter had seen plenty of men like Daniel Parker before. Wealthy, arrogant, the type who thought the law didn't apply to them. The type who walked into courtrooms acting like they owned the place. But here's the thing, Parker didn't own this courtroom. She did. Parker was a well-known businessman, but not for the right reasons. He had made millions promising once-in-a-lifetime investment deals, but when the truth came out, his entire business was a scam. People had lost everything because of him, their life savings, retirement funds, even their homes. And now, he was finally facing justice. But instead of sitting there with humility, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like the whole thing was a joke. He wasn't taking this seriously at all. When the prosecutor listed out the charges, Parker barely reacted. When his victims gave emotional testimonies, explaining how he had ruined their lives, he yawned. Judge Carter watched him carefully. She had seen criminals before, but there was something different about Parker. He wasn't just a scam artist. He was entitled, and if there was one thing she didn't tolerate in her courtroom, it was arrogance. Parker was facing years in prison, but looking at him now, you wouldn't have thought he had a single worry in the world. And that was going to change. The courtroom was tense. The victims had spoken. The evidence had been laid out. The prosecutor had made it clear Daniel Parker was guilty. But Parker? He sat there like none of it mattered. He had walked into the courtroom wearing an expensive tailored suit, looking like a man who still believed he was above the law. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he smirked. "Yeah, I have something to say." The room went silent. Judge Carter nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Parker." Parker leaned forward, adjusting his cufflinks like this was a business meeting, not a sentencing hearing where his freedom was on the line. "This whole thing is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "You all act like I'm some kind of criminal. I built businesses. I made people money. I created jobs." The victims in the audience gasped. A woman in the front row, one of Parker's victims, clutched her hands together. Her eyes filled with tears. "Made people money?" one man muttered. "You stole my retirement fund." Parker shrugged. "Bad investments happen. It's not my fault some people don't understand how business works." Judge Carter's expression didn't change. But inside, she had heard enough. "You're saying you take no responsibility for your actions?" she asked, her voice calm, measured. Parker scoffed. "I'm saying I shouldn't be here. You should be thanking me for creating jobs instead of treating me like some street criminal." Judge Carter's jaw tightened. There it was. That arrogance, that belief that he was better than everyone else in the room. "You do realize," she said, "that you defrauded these people. You promised them financial security and took everything they had." Parker waved a hand. "They took the risk. It's not my job to hold their hands. That's life. Some people win, some people lose." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The audacity of his words stunned people. Judge Carter held up a hand to silence the crowd. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Parker, you scammed innocent people out of millions. You left them with nothing. Do you really feel no remorse?" Parker laughed. "Remorse? Please. The only thing I regret is sitting through this joke of a trial. I've got lawyers. I've got connections. You think a little courtroom speech is going to scare me?" The victims in the room looked horrified. Judge Carter's fingers tapped lightly on her desk. "So, what you're telling me is, given the chance, you'd do it all again?" Parker smirked. "I'm saying, if people are dumb enough to fall for a business deal that doesn't work out, that's on them, not me." More gasps filled the courtroom. A reporter in the back scribbled furiously in a notebook. The cameras from the press recorded everything. This was going to be headline news. Judge Carter's eyes darkened. She had seen criminals before. Thieves, dealers, gang members, people who made bad choices and regretted them. But Parker? He wasn't just a scam artist. He was entitled. And if there was one thing she didn't tolerate in her courtroom, it was arrogance. She took a deep breath and began reading his sentence. Parker rolled his eyes and muttered, "Just shut up and get to the point." The entire courtroom gasped. For a second, no one moved. The disrespect in that moment was unbelievable. One of the victims covered her mouth. A juror raised their eyebrows in shock. Even the defense attorney, who had been fighting for Parker's case, winced. Parker, realizing the room had gone dead silent, leaned back in his chair, smirking. Judge Carter slowly placed her hands on the desk in front of her. Her eyes locked onto Parker's, sharp and unreadable. The energy in the room shifted. And in that moment, everyone knew. Parker had just made the worst mistake of his life. Judge Carter exhaled slowly. "Excuse me." Parker shrugged. "I said shut up and get to the point. You're dragging this out and I have better things to do." The audience was stunned. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. The bailiff shifted in his stance, ready for whatever came next. Judge Carter remained completely still. And then, in a voice so calm it was terrifying, she spoke. "Mr. Parker, let me explain something to you," she said. "This is my courtroom, and in my courtroom, you do not speak to me that way." Parker scoffed. "Oh, please. You're just enjoying the attention. Just hurry up and read whatever sentence you've got so I can file an appeal." Judge Carter didn't blink. She just looked at him. And in that moment, Daniel Parker felt something shift. For the first time that day, he wasn't so sure of himself anymore. The smirk on his face faltered just slightly. The confidence in his posture dipped ever so slightly. Judge Carter tilted her head. "You think you're in control, don't you, Mr. Parker?" Parker swallowed but tried to cover it with a shrug. "I just think this whole thing is ridiculous." Judge Carter sat back in her chair. "Then let me make this very clear for you." She turned to the victims sitting in the gallery. "I was prepared to consider a fair sentence today. A sentence that reflected not just the law, but also the possibility of rehabilitation." She turned back to Parker. "But since you have no remorse, no respect, and clearly no understanding of what justice means," she picked up a document from the desk, "I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty under the law." The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, a shocked silence that followed like a wave. Parker's face drained of color, his smirk gone, his attitude shattered. He sat up straighter. "Wait, what? That's not—" Judge Carter held up a hand. "You made your position clear, Mr. Parker. Now it's my turn. And in my courtroom, I am the one who gets the last word." Parker gripped the table in front of him. "But—" She slammed the gavel. Case closed. Parker sat there, frozen, as the reality hit him. His money couldn't save him. His connections couldn't protect him. His attitude just cost him everything, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Parker regretted running his mouth. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Daniel Parker sat frozen in his chair, his cocky smirk completely wiped off his face. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. The cameras were still rolling. The press was still taking notes. The victims, people he had laughed at just minutes ago, were now watching him with satisfaction. Judge Carter didn't flinch. She had seen every trick in the book. Men like Parker who thought they could buy their way out of consequences. Not today. She folded her hands on the bench and spoke in a slow, deliberate voice. "Mr. Parker, let me make something very clear to you. This is not your boardroom. This is not your playground. This is a court of law. And in my courtroom, disrespect will not be tolerated." Parker opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. "Be quiet." He froze. "I have watched you mock this trial. Dismiss your victims and act as if the law does not apply to you." She continued, "But let me be the first to tell you, you are not special." The entire courtroom gasped. Parker blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" Judge Carter didn't even raise her voice. "You heard me. You are not above the law. You are not above these people. And today, you're going to learn that." A cold bead of sweat trickled down Parker's temple. His lawyers shifted nervously beside him, realizing too late that their client had gone too far. Judge Carter continued, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "You walked into this courtroom believing you were untouchable," she said. "That your wealth, your arrogance, and your connections could shield you from the truth. But let me ask you something, Mr. Parker. Where are your connections now?" Parker's lips pressed into a thin line. "You scammed innocent people. People who trusted you with their livelihoods. People who now have nothing because of your greed," Judge Carter said. "And instead of remorse, instead of accountability, you chose to laugh in their faces." A woman in the audience nodded in agreement, tears in her eyes. Judge Carter's gaze didn't waver. "Do you know what real power is, Mr. Parker? It's not money. It's not status. It's not talking over people and demanding that they shut up. Real power is knowing when to listen." Parker shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked nervous. Judge Carter didn't stop. "You told me to shut up in my own courtroom," she said. "That was your final mistake." She picked up her gavel. "Mr. Parker, I was prepared to offer you a reduced sentence in exchange for accountability, but since you have made it clear that you have no remorse, I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed by law." Gasps erupted through the room. Parker's eyes widened in panic. "Wait," he started, his voice cracking. Judge Carter slammed the gavel down. "This court is adjourned," she said. "Mr. Parker, you are officially remanded into custody. Your bail is revoked, effective immediately." The bailiffs stepped forward. Parker shot up from his seat. "You can't do that." Judge Carter tilted her head. "I just did." The audience erupted. Some victims cheered. Others wiped away tears of relief. The press scribbled notes furiously as Parker was led away in handcuffs. The reality of his situation finally hit him. His money couldn't save him. His connections wouldn't protect him. His arrogance had cost him everything, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Parker regretted running his mouth. Daniel Parker had never felt powerless before. His entire life, he had been the one calling the shots, the one people listened to, the one who always had a way out. But now he was being escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His suit jacket felt too tight. His throat felt dry. His mind raced, trying to figure out how this had happened. This wasn't how the world worked for him. He was supposed to be untouchable. His lawyers hurried behind him, whispering about appeals, about calling in favors, about making this all go away. But the look on Judge Carter's face when she handed down his sentence, that was final. And for the first time in his life, Parker understood. Money wasn't going to save him this time. As the bailiffs led him toward the holding area, one of his victims stepped forward. She had been quiet throughout the trial, sitting in the back with her arms folded, watching him with tired, broken eyes. But now, she spoke. "You ruined my life," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. She didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't call him names. But her words hit harder than anything. Parker looked away. The truth was, he didn't even remember her. He had scammed so many people, made so many empty promises, taken so much money. They all blended together. But now, standing there, watching the pain in her face, feeling the weight of his sentence sinking in, it wasn't just business anymore. It was real. And no matter how much he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't, because at the end of the day, Judge Carter had been right. Power wasn't about money. Real power was knowing when to listen, and he had spent his whole life talking over people who deserved to be heard. But now, no one cared what he had to say. And that was the biggest punishment of all. Daniel Parker sat in a cold, windowless cell. The reality of his situation was starting to hit him. No more first-class flights, no more expensive suits, no more assistants waiting on his every word. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. And worst of all, no one cared. He had spent years making people believe he was untouchable, that his money made him invincible. But now he was just another criminal. No VIP treatment, no private lawyers coming to bail him out. His assets had been frozen, his friends nowhere to be found, and the people he had once laughed at, they were celebrating. He thought about that woman in the courtroom, the one who had lost everything because of him. She had looked him in the eye and said, "You ruined my life." At the time, he didn't care, but now, that sentence was echoing in his head, because for the first time he finally understood. She wasn't just some random name on a spreadsheet. She was a real person, and he had destroyed her. And for what? More money, more power. He couldn't even remember why he did it. Judge Carter had been right. He thought power came from money and control. But real power? Real power was doing what was right. And that was something he had never done. Now, it was too late. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Judge Carter sat in her office, signing paperwork. Another case closed. Another arrogant man held accountable. She'd seen too many people like Parker, men who thought the law was just a game. But every once in a while, one of them actually learned something. She didn't know if Parker would ever change, but she did know one thing. Today, justice was served, because no matter how rich you are, no matter how powerful you think you are never above the law. Daniel Parker thought his money would save him. He thought his arrogance made him powerful. But in the end, it made him powerless. Judge Carter didn't just hand him a sentence, she handed him the truth, that no amount of wealth could protect him from justice. And now he sat in a prison cell, left alone with his regrets. The people he had scammed were rebuilding their lives. And Parker? He was starting over too, but not in the way he expected, because for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. Now, here's the real question. Do you think he actually learned his lesson? Or is he just another scammer waiting for his next opportunity? Let us know in the comments. And if you love stories where karma comes back around, hit that like button, share this with a friend, And subscribe for more powerful stories about justice and accountability, because at the end of the day, respect isn't bought, it's earned.